Hi guys, welcome to this new video. Do subscribe, like, share, and turn on post notification by clicking on the bell icon to get notified when we post new content and encourage the channel. In our last series, we designed a Donors API that integrates payment with Paystack. In this sequel, we will design the front-end application that consumes this API with React. We will cover how the whole system connects to give the user a seamless payment experience. To begin with, let's have a recap of the API by taking a look at the documentation. I would attach links to the documentation, the API YouTube playlist, and GitHub repos in order to clone and run the APIs to code along. Here we have two APIs, initialize payment and verify payment. The initialize payment API is where we initialize the payment on Paystack to generate an authorization URL that leads to the Paystack checkout page where the donor would enter appropriate card or bank details to complete payment. Here we're required to pass email, name, amount, and an optional callback URL, which you will see shortly, and the response contains data that has the authorization URL. Next, we move to the verify payment endpoint, where payment is verified and value given using a unique payment reference generated from the previous step. And we get a response data that contains the donor, his email or her email, the amount donated, the payment reference, and timestamps. I have taken the liberty to set up a starting point for our application, basically containing display components. I scaffolded the React app using Vite and added donate, donation, and error pages. Let's run the app so we can have a feel of it. Once the app is running, you'll navigate to the URL generated, and here we see a donate form at the index of our application. If we try to donate, we see that there's validation enabled, so you can fill this form and then we click donate. We see it submits with the form data correctly, so we'll navigate to the donations page to see a sample of the donation, which is actually a receipt. For now, this is dummy data. Once we integrate the APIs, we will see dynamic data coming from our APIs. We also have the error page. So if we go to an unknown route, so this displays error for routes that are not available or an error occurs. So we can also navigate back to the home page. So we'll switch over to the code base to have a walkthrough. The main.ts file is the entry point of our React application, and you can see that I have used React Router DOM and Browser Router to set up our application. Next, we navigate to the app component. The app component contains the route of our application. Note that in the outer route component, we have the layout, and the index route leads to the donate page, the /donation route leads to the donation, while the error route is the last route and uses the wildcard to catch any unknown routes. Let's have a sneak peek of the layout component. So the layout component is basically a div with a header and an outlet. The outlet component will be where the dynamic content of our pages will be displayed. Moving on, we'll take a closer look at the donate page. The donate page is basically a card component rendering a form inside of it. The form is driven by a form configuration and a validation schema. The form configuration consists of a list of input configurations consisting of label, which is the input label, the name of that particular input, the type of input, and finally the Validation schema is a YOP schema object that consists of rules for different input fields. For the name, we expect it to be a minimum of 3 characters, and it's required. For the amount is actually a number that should be at least 100, and it's required. The next thing is the email, which should be a string and should validate as an email, and it's required. Next, we'll take a look at the card component. The card component is basically a div that renders its children inside of it and styles as container with rounded borders. Let's take a closer look at the form component. This is a formik inspired form builder. We are using formik to handle form states, values, errors, events, and validation. We map through each form config element to display the input field that matches that configuration. And finally, we have a button that controls form submission. Moving on to the input field. This displays a label, an input, and an error. The error is conditionally rendered when the input field fails validation and has been touched at least once. Point to note here is that we should pass the formik handle blur to the component in order to ensure that the touch state updates properly. Moving on to the button. The button component is used to render a button or a link styled as a button. It returns a link if the type is equal to link, or else it returns a button, and the link defaults to a dummy link as seen in the two props. We have finally been able to go through all the components featured on the donates page. So let's shift our attention to the donations page. The donations page is used to display the donation receipt. So this renders a message component with an appropriate title and a message. Notice that the expected payment data from the verification should contain the donor's name and the amount, and we have created a mock data here which has been properly formatted in the message to display an appropriate message. Also, we have converted the amount from kobo to naira as specified in the documentation. Next, we spotlight the message component. The message component returns a card component that consists basically of a header, a description, and a button that leads back to the index page. Finally, we'll take a look at the error page. The error page basically returns a message that has the title of an error and a description. Now that we have an overview of the current state of the application, let's get our hands dirty integrating the donations API to our application. Thanks for staying tuned to this video. Do subscribe, like, share, and click the bell icon to get notified when we post a new video to support the channel.